Mr. Gay. Where's the bug guy? I'm going to tease the Fullers because I think they got hungry earlier than anybody else. But before I start, I'm going to do some housekeeping. Because I think I'm speaking to predominantly young Gambians who have not celebrated 25-year-old. Am I correct? Right? We cannot start late and have breakfast early as a society. And hopefully that's the ethos that the Chemical Society of the Gambia takes on, because there's a sense of urgency that we have. I'm going to begin by standing on previous protocols to honor and respect my fellow members of the high table, and begin by thanking the greatest alchemist that ever lived, which is God. The greatest alchemist that ever lived is our Creator. Whoever religion, everything in life started with chemistry. But it begs the question as it pertains to Gambia and Africa. I'm glad my brothers mentioned Africa. We should stop thinking Gambia. We should start thinking Africa. Because Gambia is not even 70 years old. But the history of chemistry in Africa dates more than 2,000 years old. So it begs three questions that you guys will have to answer. Why now? What for? And where to? Why a chemical of society now? What are we forming it for? And where do we want to go with it? That is the question that every single person who is here needs to leave this room with a clear understanding that when there is consensus to form an organization, meaning multiple heads came together and saw a need, it can be formed for social reasons. It needs to be formed for its utility, not for the members who formed it, but for the rest of humanity. Very important. When we talk about chemistry, as I mentioned, you guys may know the concept of Sankofa. Before you know where you're going, you have to know where you came from. Professor over here will understand when I say, hello helium, let bad boys come nearer, or father never salt my apple, silicon past sulfur, chlorine argon past calcium. That was how I learned the first 20 elements of the periodic table almost 20 years ago. But I think there was a flaw in that design. As he mentioned, I fell in love with chemistry in high school. I was a science student at Gambia High School. All right? And if you guys remember, when you're doing titration, and for the non-chemical people, if you take an acid, which is corrosive, and a base, you get what? Salt and water. And the fact that something that is considered acidic created something that was pure in water, for me was the greatest manifestation of what science is. Which is why science and spirituality go hand in hand. Even if you're a religious person and you study the history of Islam, you'll understand that Islamic mysticism most of the times were conducted by people they call alchemists, because their knowledge base served the purpose of humanity as healers. People like Fakhruddin Attar, who was a Sufi that lived a couple of years, thousands of years ago. So ladies and gentlemen, we always have to understand history. See, if I was a 10-year-old Gambian boy and my first introduction to chemistry was not a textbook that a non-African person wrote, my relationship with chemistry would have been different. I was studying chemistry until I was 28 years old. So if anybody could speak about chemical societies and chemistry, I think I'm a little bit qualified to do it, because I've taken every single chemistry course one can take to achieve the level of a doctor of pharmacy. From general chemistry to organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, analytical chemistry, physical chemistry, which is the hardest chemistry class I've ever had to take. So Professor, I hail you, right? Analytical chemistry, medicinal chemistry, industrial chemistry, right? Not a single textbook that I came across in up to the age of 28 included the chemistry that was happening at Timbuktu. Not a single textbook that I was ingesting and delivering to pass included the chemistry that was happening in Egypt, when black people like Imhotep were the founders of chemistry. So part of the reason why we struggle to understand the value of science and knowledge is because oftentimes we cannot see ourselves in it. Our educational system makes us feel like knowledge was not born on these lands that we live in. If somebody explained to me chemistry as the lady who sat in front of Albert Market selling churai, fragrance, to my grandmother, Aja Fatim Manga of Afdai, who had a store at Albert Market, that lady was a chemist. If chemistry was explained to me from a perspective of a goldsmith who anywhere around the world, the moment you see somebody with this bangle, lump, you know they're from Senegambia. That person was a chemist. If chemistry was taught to me from a perspective of an uneducated, quote unquote, woman who cooks every single day for a compound that has 20 people and is using vinegar, acetic acid, the amount of salt, sodium chloride, to a perfection that the entire household has a palatable taste that satisfies them, that lady was a chemist, right? So if you see the world through the lens of chemistry, when professor stands in front of you, you get to realize that we are chemical. Human beings are chemical. The mystery, I told you the greatest chemist is Allah, right? He gave the difference between man and animal is the ability to create, the ability to think, right? Which is why even science theory begins with you making a hypothesis, a guess. Meaning, even if you study the history of chemistry, some people lost their lives on it because they experimented with something and they died from it. The healers that he mentioned, right? Our great-grandfathers that had wounds, a lot of what is modern day science are things that our ancestors lived on. The only difference between the black man and the non-black man is we stopped and we never documented. So when it came time to write our textbooks, our version of the history was missing. That's the biggest difference, ladies and gentlemen. So that is our responsibility right now, not to begin a chemical society, but to reclaim, improve, modernize, sustain the history of chemistry on this continent. That is our responsibility. So yes, we could celebrate chemical societies that have been around for 100 years, 80 years. But if every African child realizes that chemistry is ours, a nation cannot develop without a basic understanding of science and technology. Right? Africa's continent is producing almost so many of the cell phones that I'm seeing. If it wasn't for the soil of this continent, the cell phone that you're holding would not exist. So we need to change our mindset as a people to start thinking, change the bare soil of Gambia into silicon chips that could power the future. We need to change our mindset to stop looking down on traditional healers, but also not stop there, but encourage and challenge the marriage between scientists like myself and my brother over there for us to study our natural herbs. Because it's not good enough to say it heals and cures. No, we need to make sure it is safe and effective. And the only way you could establish that is through scientific research. So it's not either or, it's and. Which is why I laugh every time somebody tells me Western medicine, like paracetamol. Like, what do you mean, like penicillin? The source is plants. What made it Western? Why are we short selling ourselves to think whatever is good is foreign? The neem tree, if Gambia decided to study the neem tree, moringa, baobab, and dedicated resources for 20, 30 years, our problems will be here and the problems will be solved here. Right? So there's a shift in mindset that needs to happen. So we're not starting the Chemical Society of Gambia. We need to re-educate. Start at the youngest level. I feel like Africa is at a point where you should not open a textbook that was not written on the continent without understanding the history of your people as it relates to that subject matter. Because if a child understands that makeup and cosmetics is chemistry, tie-dye, batik, mbaseng is chemistry, metal work is chemistry, the skyscrapers that existed in Mali and the Timbuktu area before it was in the West, all those things are chemistry. The tattoos that my grandmother used to have, Denjam, you guys know Denjam? That symbolized somebody who came, a woman who came to age, that permanent dye that they used with a needle, that was technology. That was chemistry, knowing that if this interacts with your skin, it's able to maintain it. So even now when we see women getting married and they do the fudan, the temporary tattoos, see the world through chemistry and you'll see yourself in it. The moment you start seeing yourself in what is a foundational course of science, it opens up the possibilities. So now you could build a Gambia where one of these young women that are in here could have the largest beauty brand because she studied chemistry. And cosmetology is all chemistry. If I put this on my skin, how does it react with my skin? The same way if you have acne, which is pimples, and you put benzoyl peroxide on it, there's a reaction that happens with the bacteria under your skin which causes the pimple, and it goes away. That is chemistry in work. So let's not learn blindly. Be curious. The biggest difference between nations that develop in science and technology is a nation that is intellectually curious. A nation of people that vibrate at a high frequency. If we're being honest, we're vibrating at a low frequency. That's the same way I could still memorize 20 elements on the periodic table. And I'm now relearning, after completing a level of mastery, I am relearning my relationship with this continent when it comes to science and technology. And I'm seeing myself in it. So my plea to you guys is, let's not make this a social society. The future of any nation depends on science and technology. The day you lose your prowess in your ability to study, understand chemistry, it affects food, technology, agriculture, healthcare. So it should be a shift in our mindset. And the first shift that needs to happen, I'm going to turn to the theme of today. It says, let's support scientific research for national development. The one thing we need to change, let's remove the let's support. Support comes with conditions. Support can be temporary. and the support you're signaling to the world that it cannot happen without the help of an external factor. Gambia needs to take ownership of scientific research for national development. Ownership is don't give me fish, teach me how to fish so that I could feed myself for a century. Ownership is, okay, I'm gonna focus the next 100 years in studying every plant that grows on the soil and challenge the manufacturing companies that are importing into the country to start manufacturing using things that we own. Because if the world closes around Africa, we could still sustain ourselves. Let's stop looking for support and take ownership, because once you take ownership of something, you're now part of the process of building the nation. So I'm deeply honored by this invitation. I said yes because I know I've had a relationship with chemistry that began from an intellectual curiosity standpoint. It's evolved into a spiritual relationship with understanding chemistry and how the world works. So I just urge you guys, as the future of Gambia, where when you sit down and speak 30 years, 20 years from now, we are now looking back to a moment where we did not begin, but we remembered where we came from, and we participated by co-equal ownership to build the future of a nation that depends on us. And when I say nation, I mean the nation of Africa. Gambia is an experiment. The world is global. The professor who has contributed to the lives of many people in the Gambia was not born in Gambia as we know it. He chose us. So as young African people, we need to start vibrating at a higher frequency. Be intellectually curious. When Professor was in your shoes, you guys have an arsenal of knowledge and information on your phones that he had to spend the night at the library to pass an exam. So you guys are at a very critical point in our history where the future of this nation depends on you guys. So for the society, as you mentioned, my organization will support. But our support comes with more than just support. We're going to take ownership of this society. We're going to challenge you guys. We're going to challenge you guys, the students. Be intellectually curious. And for fun, just for the next couple of days, start seeing everything that you interact with through the lens of chemistry. And you'll realize that the greatest chemist that ever lived was the man upstairs. Thank you.